Hi, I'm Sophia Rivera, and this is the story of how my mother-in-law's dream vacation turned into her worst nightmare. Sometimes the people you look down on aren't as powerless as you think. I met Ethan Carter at a cafe where I worked as a barista while pursuing my master's degree in business. Ethan was unlike the other wealthy patrons, kind, genuine, and never making me feel lesser for serving coffee. Falling in love with him felt like a fairy tale. But I wasn't prepared for his mother, Margaret Carter, who seemed determined to turn my dream into a nightmare. Margaret wasn't just rich, she was old money rich, the kind of wealth that considers anything less than a private jet to be an embarrassment. From the very beginning, she made it clear that a coffee shop girl didn't belong in the Carter family. "Darling," she'd say to Ethan while I stood nearby, "have you heard that the Kensington girl just returned from Paris? Still single, I believe." Despite her disdain, Ethan stood by me. We married in a small, intimate ceremony that Margaret dismissed as charmingly rustic, which I knew was her way of calling it cheap. For 3 years, I endured her thinly veiled insults at every family gathering. "Sophia, dear," she'd ask with an icy smile, "is that dress from a department store? Or, how fascinating that you used to serve coffee. It must be such a relief to never work again." What Margaret didn't know was that while I poured lattes and studied late into the night, I had been investing in cryptocurrency. Those early investments had blossomed into a fortune that could rival the Carter family's wealth. Though I chose to live modestly and reinvest my gains, Ethan knew, but he respected my wish to keep it private. Everything came to a head during the planning of the annual Carter family vacation. Each year, Margaret curated an opulent trip for the extended family, a showcase of her wealth and control. This year's planning dinner was held at her grand estate. As everyone gathered in the gold-accented dining room, Margaret revealed her plans with an air of self-importance. "I've outdone myself this year," she announced, practically glowing with pride. "We'll be staying at the Azure Pearl Island Resort, a private island in the Maldives. Private beaches, personal chefs, helicopter tours, only the best for the Carters." The room erupted in impressed murmurs. Azure Pearl was one of the most exclusive resorts in the world, booked years in advance. Margaret, however, turned her sharp gaze to me. "And about the guest list," she continued with mock sweetness, "Sophia, darling, I'm sure you understand that this sort of vacation requires a certain refinement. Perhaps it would be best if you sat this one out. These luxury settings can be so overwhelming for someone of your background." Ethan immediately objected. "Mother, if Sophia's not going, I'm not going either." Margaret's smile tightened. "Don't be ridiculous, Ethan. The whole family will be there. You can't miss it just because your wife isn't comfortable in such settings." His sister, Cassandra, added, "Mother's right. Sophia would feel so out of place. Remember how awkward she looked at the yacht club last summer?" I placed a hand on Ethan's arm. "It's fine," I said softly. "You should go with your family." Margaret's triumphant smirk told me she thought she had won. What she didn't know was that I had been planning something of my own. 6 months earlier, I overheard Margaret talking about her dream of booking Azure Pearl. Recognizing an opportunity, I made a few calls. The resort had been struggling financially, and its owner was looking for a discreet buyout. Through a series of shell companies, I purchased not just the Azure Pearl Resort, but the entire island. I kept the management team in place, waiting for the perfect moment. The morning the Carters boarded their private jet, I called the resort manager. It was time to set my plan into motion. Margaret had no idea that her perfect vacation was about to turn into an unforgettable lesson. When the family arrived at Azure Pearl that afternoon, Margaret strutted onto the pristine beaches, already planning how she'd flaunt the trip on social media. But the staff, as per my instructions, greeted them coolly and escorted them to a modest set of accommodations, the least luxurious villas on the island. Margaret was outraged. "This must be a mistake," she barked. "We reserved the best villas on the island." The resort manager smiled politely. "I'm afraid those villas are unavailable, Mrs. Carter." Margaret turned red. "Unavailable? Do you know who I am?" "Yes, we do," the manager replied. "And we were instructed to ensure these accommodations meet your family's needs. You see, the owner has very specific policies." Margaret demanded to speak to the owner, her frustration mounting. That's when I stepped into the room. "Welcome to Azure Pearl Island." The resort manager, Nathan, greeted them with a knowing smile. "We've been expecting you." Margaret Carter beamed, soaking in the pristine beauty of the resort. Everything looks perfect. I assume the presidential villa is ready for me? Nathan glanced at his tablet, his expression perfectly neutral. About that, he replied, there's been a slight change in arrangements. The owner is currently using the presidential villa. Margaret's carefully maintained composure faltered. That's impossible. I booked the entire island. No other guests were supposed to be here. The owner isn't a guest, Mrs. Carter, Nathan explained calmly. They own the property and have final say over all accommodations. Margaret's face hardened. And who is this owner? I demand to speak with them. Nathan's polite smile never wavered. Of course. If you'll follow me to the main pavilion, the owner has left specific instructions for your arrival. The Carters were led to an elegant open-air pavilion overlooking the turquoise ocean. As they settled into the luxurious seating, a large screen flickered to life. On it, a video began to play. My face appeared, and through the resort's security feeds, I watched Margaret's jaw drop. Hello, Carter family, my recorded self said warmly. Welcome to my island. Yes, you heard that correctly. I own Azure Pearl Island Resort, along with several other luxury properties worldwide. A stunned silence fell over the group, broken only by gasps of disbelief. Ethan, trying to suppress a grin, looked sideways at his mother, who was visibly fuming. You see, I continued on the screen. While you were busy judging me for making coffee and assuming I couldn't afford luxury experiences, I was quietly building an empire. That coffee girl you dismissed. She's now worth more than the entire Carter family fortune combined. Margaret collapsed into a chair, her designer handbag sliding to the ground. Cassandra looked pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Now about your accommodations, the video went on, my tone sweet but firm. Margaret, you'll be staying in our economy villa. It's quite basic by your standards, but as you once said, some people need to learn their place. The rest of the family will be housed in standard rooms. Consider this a lesson in humility. This is outrageous, Margaret shrieked, rising to her feet. I pay for the presidential villa. Nathan, standing nearby, replied smoothly. Your deposit has been refunded. The owner's decision is final. The video continued. Oh, and Margaret, remember when you said that luxury resorts can be overwhelming for someone of my background? Let's test that theory. I've arranged for you to work as a server at the beach bar during your stay. Think of it as a chance to walk in someone else's shoes. Margaret's face turned crimson with rage. I will not. Do you have any idea who I am? Yes, Nathan replied, unflustered. You're the mother-in-law of our owner, who has left strict instructions. If you choose not to comply, you're welcome to leave, though the next flight out isn't for 3 days. Chaos ensued. Margaret threatened lawsuits, demanded her phone, which mysteriously had no signal, and even tried to charter a private helicopter. All of it, of course, had been preemptively blocked by my orders. For the next 2 weeks, Margaret Carter served cocktails at the beach bar, her designer clothes replaced by the resort's simple staff uniform. The name tag on her chest read Margaret, trainee, gleaming under the tropical sun. Each time she delivered a drink, she endured the amused smirks of her family and the respectful nods of the resort staff she once would have ignored. On their final day, I arrived at the resort. Margaret was wiping down the bar, her once pristine appearance disheveled, her makeup melting in the heat. I took a seat on a stool, watching her for a moment before speaking. Having fun? I asked, a hint of amusement in my voice. She turned to me, her anger replaced by exhaustion. Why did you do this? She asked softly. Because, I replied. You needed to learn that worth isn't determined by background or bank accounts. Every person who served you a drink, cleaned your room, or cooked your meals is a human being, deserving of respect. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. I never thought about it that way. I know, I said gently. That was the problem. From that day forward, Margaret Carter was a changed woman. The experience of walking in someone else's shoes, literally, transformed her perspective. She founded a charity that provided scholarships for service industry workers, and she began treating everyone she met with kindness and respect. These days, family dinners at the Carter home are different. Margaret makes a point to learn the names and stories of every server. Last Christmas, she'd insisted on serving the meal herself, saying it helped her stay grounded. As for the Azure Pro Resort, it now runs a unique program where privileged guests spend part of their stay working alongside staff, learning the value of humility. Margaret helps oversee the program, sharing her story as a cautionary tale about prejudice and pride. And me, Ethan and I still visit the cafe where we first met, enjoying our morning coffee like we always have. Sometimes Margaret joins us, chatting easily with the baristas she once ignored. Last week, she gave me a photo album filled with pictures from that fateful vacation. On the final page, she had written, "Thank you for teaching me that the best view in life comes from stepping off your high horse." It's a reminder that true luxury isn't about thread counts or private jets. It's about seeing the worth in every person you meet. And Margaret, she still works one shift a month at the beach bar. She says it keeps her humble.